Now to the unfolding crisis in Afghanistan. Taliban fighters surround the capital Kabul from all sides. It follows the rapid fall of provincial capitals, which left Kabul as the only big city left that are not falling to the militants. An Afghan government official says talks with the Taliban are ongoing in the presidential palace on a peaceful transition of power. The Afghan president Ashraf Ghani has reportedly left the country. Earlier, the Taliban had captured the northern city of Jalalabad. Local leaders reportedly agreed to hand it over without a fight. The Taliban have pledged not to take Kabul by force, as sporadic gunfire and smoke could be heard and seen in the capital. A Taliban spokesman said their fighters have been asked to stand at entry points to the capital, while calling on Afghan forces to cease gunfire and allow safe passage to civilians and foreign nationals. Meanwhile, the United States is evacuating members of staff from its embassy in Kabul. President Joe Biden has sent in additional 1,000 troops to aid the evacuation. Chinook helicopters could be seen taking off and landing near the diplomatic outpost in the Afghan capital this morning. Well, I have Professor Bola Akinterinwa, former Director General of the Nigerian Institute of International Affairs and a Professor of International Relations and Diplomacy, to look at this subject. Professor Akinterinwa, the symbolism of it, the tragedy of it. All of a sudden, we're back to Saigon in 1975, when the Americans had to flee, from Vietnam. To what extent is this a product of America's miscalculations? Because, it looks like America missed, the point with regard to Afghanistan. And everyone is saying, well, America, the United States, has been humiliated in this regard.
I think we should look at the issues dispassionately. Dispassionately simply because I do not agree that the United States has failed. I hold a mixed feeling on it. Mixed feeling simply because you will recall that at least the issue of Al-Qaeda, the leader, the Americans took particular interest in finding an enduring solution to the threats of terrorists. And you will recall that the United States actually led a Euro-American coalition about 20 years ago to go there. Now, the issue of Al-Qaeda, to a great extent, has been set aside. Now, miscalculation, yes, because the Joe Biden administration holds a strong belief that is quite different from that of his predecessors. He's now saying that he does not have any justification whatsoever to continue to sustain American presence in Afghanistan. Now, he's simply now trying to say that, look, if the people of Afghanistan really want to continue to stay as a sovereign state and survive, there will be need for them also to find alternative policy attitude. So in this case, the implication is that in the past 20 years, there was actually no Afghanistan without the United States. The United States decided on July 2nd, for instance, to withdraw its troops. And in this particular case, opportunity was now given and renewed to the Taliban that are now there, are now taking over power. So, to an extent, we can look at it to say, well, it is a failed diplomacy for the U.S. because the purpose of the coalition about 20 years ago appears not to have succeeded. They have not been able to outrightly, completely set aside the Taliban.
Well, 20 years ago, you will recall, we had September 11. And now, when President Trump was in office, February 29, 2020, he organized a peace deal with the Taliban. Part of it was that the Taliban would not use Afghanistan as a center for terrorist activities. There was also an agreement on intra-Afghan talks. But all of this will seem to have failed. And now we have the Americans pulling out with helicopters, and the president of Afghanistan himself has fled. That's why I asked you whether this is a question of miscalculation. President Trump agreed to withdraw by May. By January 2021, half of the troops were pulled out of Afghanistan. Then, of course, President Biden came into office and he said, well, the withdrawal now will be by September 2021. Now, these same Taliban who have taken over major cities and who have surrounded Kabul, they couldn't do that about 2 weeks ago. Now, within a space of 10 days, they've done it. So that's why I'm saying it looks like miscalculation and a tragedy for the Biden administration. How far do you think this will affect the Biden presidency?
You see, if you are looking at the situation at the level of Afghanistan alone, I will subscribe to your argument, and you'll be right. But you see, you must look at the geopolitics. The factor of Russia, for instance, the Russian government has been assured that, look, there's no problem for the Russians, that there's no need to downgrade or to close down completely your embassy, that nothing will happen. On the basis of that assurance, the Russians are watching. Now, the issue is that we should look at the American and Russian interest in the Afghanistan case. So it should not be looked at exclusively at the level of U.S. interest, success or failure. So in this case, even if there might have been miscalculation, it must be to the advantage of the protection of U.S. interest there. Now, Joe Biden is saying that, look, we have been in this business for so long, the problem has not been given any enduring solution, then there's no need for permanent or indeterminable period of stay there. That means that there is a U.S. strategic interest that is being factored in. So, in diplomacy, you have an offensive, aggressive, as well as aggressive defensive strategy. I want to believe that American strategy in this case is to, first of all, withdraw, to be able to recalculate, re-strategize. So we shouldn't be very quick in thinking that it is more of a failure. Please note that the Russian government has called for an emergency meeting of the United Nations Security Council on this matter.
Yes, it's not just the United Nations. Russia is also organizing a meeting on the issue. The British Parliament is going to return from recess to take a decision on all of this. But what happened to the training? Part of the U.S. mandate after Resolution 1267 of the UN Security Council was not just to declare the Taliban and the Al-Qaeda terrorist organizations, but to also move in and over the years provide training for the Afghan forces. What happened to all that training? Is it that Afghanistan did not learn anything from the Americans before President Trump decided on withdrawal?
You can have the training for the Afghan soldiers. There's nothing wrong with that. But we easily lose the sight of the fact that there are some supporters, the pros and cons. We have Afghan enjoying the support of Russia. And in this case, you now have a situation of a Euro-American coalition on the one side. Then you have the supporters of the Afghan government. So when you have a training of the soldiers in terms of statistical importance, how many have been trained? Compare with the outside forces that are coming to impact on the domestic setting. So in this case, the training might have not gone too far. The critical problem now is the international politics of the Afghan crisis. And if efforts were made to strengthen the defensive capacity of the Afghan soldiers, now how do you relate that one with the enemies outside of Afghanistan?
Well, I asked you that question before I take the statement from the Interior Minister of Afghanistan. To just get the point, do you think that the U.S. announced its withdrawal too soon? Because that could have emboldened the Taliban. I mean, you recall that when the initial operation against the Taliban was announced, the Taliban, they were crushed, they withdrew. Could they have been emboldened by the decision of the United States to halve its troops and then to announce eventual withdrawal?
I cannot agree more with you on that. There was never a time the Taliban were not ready. Since more than 20 years, they have been resisting. They have been there. So by the time the Americans made it clear that sooner than later they will be opting out, then there's no way the Taliban will not be so emboldened to say, this is our time, this is our chance. And in this case, they have been emboldened, they were there. And as a matter of fact, we need to explain why is it that the incumbent government itself has not been resisting. Many provinces, the Taliban just took over without any resistance. The government has not shown any attitudinal disposition to fight back, either because it's a recognition of incapacity, knowing fully well that these Taliban are more serious, they are more deliberate, and as the president said, he doesn't want any loss of life, that look, we should just take things as they are. And they are talking about peaceful negotiations.
Okay, let's take the statement from Afghanistan's Interior Minister, who has delivered a statement assuring the people of Kabul that the city will remain safe.
People should not be worried. The city is secure, and anyone who causes disorder in the city will face serious confrontation. The security of the city is guaranteed, and it will not be attacked. The agreement for the big city of Kabul is that the power will be transferred peacefully to an interim administration. Until the time an agreement is reached on Kabul and Afghanistan, I assure you all that Kabul is secure. Your sons, your security forces, and others are ready for defending Kabul.
Meanwhile, the president, Ashraf Ghani, gave this television address a short while ago. There are reports that he has now left the country.
There is a clear need that the National Directorate of Security, alongside the police and the Afghan army, take the responsibility of the security of all the citizens as per my order to the Defence Minister and the Interior Minister. It is our responsibility, and God willing, we will carry out the responsibility in its best manner.
Yeah, here we are. We had the Interior Minister and also the president. But look, the Taliban had given assurance that they were not going to enter Kabul, that they would just surround the city while negotiations continued. But the latest report we have is the spokesperson of the Taliban, saying that they will have no option but to occupy certain parts of Kabul to be able to prevent looting and to prevent chaos. So what are the likely consequences, considering the ideological nature of the Taliban? Consequences, for example, with regard to the survival of the government, the president has already fled, and also the rights of women. Women who, under the Afghanistani government had some freedom, and you know that the Taliban would descend on the rights of women and general human rights. What do you think the immediate future portends?
Let's bring the principle of what is and what ought to be into it to explain and answer to your question. The Taliban have only simply made a declaratory statement, according to which they will do one thing and not do another thing. On this ideological point, the Taliban have said that women will be given freedom. But whether they will now comply, whether they will believe in it, whether they will implement what they have declared remains a different kettle of fish entirely. Now, the Taliban are on record to have also promised that, look, they will need the Afghans to come and assist in rebuilding the country, in reshaping policies. Now, they do not want them to flee the country. These are very encouraging policy statements. But what is the likelihood that they will believe in what they have said by complying, by implementing that? That was why I was talking about what is and what ought to be. What ought to be now is actually the implementation of their declaratory statements to ensure that a situation of insecurity is not provided for at all. But the situation on ground in Afghanistan is such that the Taliban's coming to government will want to have international recognition too, recognition of government, to be able to relate very well with the general international community, meaning that the extent to which the Taliban government of tomorrow will be able to do and undo things recklessly, I think that one will be remote. The government needs the domestic support as well as international recognition.
Well, the international community, from Britain to Russia to Pakistan to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, they are already expressing concern about human rights, that the rights of individuals in Afghanistan should be protected. But earlier on, I said, this is a tragedy for the United States, even in terms of its symbolism. But the biggest statement, the most pointed statement that we have had from the U.S. Secretary of State is that this is not Saigon. Why is it not Saigon? Considering the fact that the U.S. is pulling out its men, and even the embassy is being relocated to the airport, very close to the helicopters and to aircraft, so that they can get out of Kabul. Is Antony Blinken, is it right to say this is not Saigon? Because this looks really like Saigon and the humiliation of the United States.
You have said it all. You say it looks like Saigon, but it is not Saigon. That's two different things.
You agree with Antony Blinken?
No, you see.
What's the difference?
Let me tell you, the beauty of diplomacy and strategic calculations is that you always withdraw to re-strategize. Now, nobody can predict what is in the thinking of the American security strategists. Whether tomorrow the Americans will just send soldiers or will go through another neighboring country to strengthen, to resist, you can never tell. You see, nobody talks about his strategic plans in this type of situation. The likelihood of Blinken, for instance, coming to Africa, going to Asia, securing and discussing their, partnerships. You've just talked about the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's members looking at the issue. We have just discussed the likely involvement of the National UN Security Council's position. We cannot know, as at this time now, the events are still unfolding. I am convinced that, look, the Taliban can come to power. There's no big deal there. The issue now is the Taliban government being made secure there. The Taliban government is now the incumbent government. But the issue now is that a new opposition, the ousted members of government, will become a new opposition to the Taliban government. And this is what we cannot quickly predict as of now.
Okay, what do you think is the future of Afghanistan? Do you think that, the Allied forces, the U.S. and its friends, will come together to see how they can take the Taliban out of power in Afghanistan? Do you think that's a possibility? And then, do you think this is of any consequence to the average American in terms of the fortunes of the Biden presidency? Or the average American is not likely to bother one way or the other what happens in Afghanistan? We have 1.5 minutes to go.
In the eyes of the Taliban, Americans are the enemy. Why? It is the American-led coalition force that prevented the Taliban since about 20 years ago from actually being in power.
Actually, since 1999.
Precisely.
It's 1999 to 2020.
So in this case, the enemy that prevented you, that ousted you from power, when you now come back and regain your power again, what do? You suspect the same Americans. In terms of the Euro-American coalition allies coming together, you cannot rule it out. For as long as their interests are not tainted, for as long as the Taliban are ready to ensure the protection of Western values that they are promoting, I think you can rub my back and I will rub your own.
Okay, Professor Bola Akinterinwa, thank you very much for your insights on the developing situation, as you described it, in Afghanistan.